Saying Hamas just needs to surrender is saying we'll kill kids until we get what we want. Of the many awful warmonger comments President Biden made in his State of the Union address Thursday night, arguably the worst was when he reiterated the U.S. empire's position that it is fine and good for the IDF to keep murdering Gazan civilians until Hamas bows to all of Israel's demands. Biden did this by lamenting the, quote, heartbreaking death and starvation of civilians in Gaza, while in the same breath stating that Hamas could end all this violence by laying down arms and surrendering those responsible for the October 7th attack. Israel has a right to go after Hamas, Biden said. Hamas ended this conflict by releasing the hostages, laying down arms, then corrected himself, could end it by releasing the hostages, laying down arms, and surrendering those responsible for October 7th. This war has taken a greater toll on innocent civilians than all previous wars in Gaza combined, Biden went on to say. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom are not Hamas. Thousands and thousands of innocents, women and children, girls and boys also orphaned. Nearly 2 million more Palestinians under bombardment or displacement. Homes destroyed, neighborhoods in rubble, cities in ruin. Families without food, water, medicine. It's heartbreaking, added Biden, referring to the genocide that he himself is actively backing and could choose to end at any time. Democrats love babbling about how heartbreaking Gaza is. It's their favorite thing to do. They love nothing more than to weep publicly over the death and starvation and unfathomable human suffering they themselves are directly responsible for, as though it's some kind of natural disaster and not a U.S.-backed genocide that is only happening because this Democrat-run administration actively facilitates it. We don't talk enough about how horrifyingly evil it is that the actual stated position of Israel and its immensely powerful allies is that all of the killing and starvation of Palestinian civilians in Gaza is entirely the fault of Hamas, because Hamas has not acquiesced to the military demands made by Israel. In effect, it is saying, we will kill thousands and thousands of children until you give us everything we want. I mean, imagine if Russia did that. Imagine if Putin started raining military explosives on parts of Ukraine known to be densely packed with children, and then saying the mass-scale child killing will continue until Ukraine surrenders, and that all of the child deaths are actually the fault of the Ukrainians because they still haven't given Putin everything he wants. I think we all know that if such a thing were to happen, it would be the subject of worldwide condemnation, and justifiably so. Such a tactic is not meaningfully different from lining up children on their knees on the battlefield and shooting them one by one in the back of the head until the enemy unconditionally surrenders. They're not just doing this with airstrikes and bullets, they're doing it with food as well. Aaron Mate has a new article out titled The Biden Doctrine of Gaza, Bomb, Starve, and Deceive, which picks apart statements from White House officials about the temporary pier this administration is planning to build on Gaza's coast over the next several weeks, ostensibly to allow for the arrival of more aid into the enclave. Mate rates the following, quote, the U.S. military pier, Biden claimed, will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day. His own aides acknowledged that this is a ruse. According to the Washington Post, administration officials quietly concede that only by securing the opening of additional land crossings will there be enough aid to prevent famine. And given that the pier will take a minimum 30 days to complete, that raises questions about how famine in Gaza will be staved off in the critical days ahead, the New York Times notes. The White House has given the answer. Rather than compel Israel to open those land crossings and prevent famine, it is instead adopting the Israeli position that the land crossings can be used as a tool of leverage against Hamas, and that Israel can control everything that gets in. In ceasefire talks, Israel has demanded that Hamas release hostages in exchange for, at best, a 6-week pause in the massacre, end quote. Mate explains that Vice President Kamala Harris recently gave a speech in which she said Hamas needs to agree to a hostage deal in order to get a significant amount of aid in, which is the same as saying Israel and its allies will help starve Gazan civilians until Hamas capitulates to their demands. The very fact that the delivery of a significant amount of aid is conditional on Hamas accepting Israeli demands underscores that Israel, with U.S. backing, is using that aid as a tool of coercion, Mate writes, noting that this directly contradicts Biden's admonishment to Israeli leaders in his State of the Union address that, quote, humanitarian assistance cannot be a secondary consideration or a bargaining chip, end quote. Washington's role in the mass murder of Palestinians in Gaza makes a lot more sense when you stop looking at it as a reductive passive witness to Israel's crimes and begin viewing it as an active participant. U.S. officials will occasionally wag their fingers at the Netanyahu government and act like Israel's worst atrocities are being carried out against the beneficent humanitarian wishes of the United States. But if you mentally mute all the narrative spin that's being placed on this thing, you just see a giant concentration camp packed full of children being murdered at mass scale by the most powerful empire that has ever existed.